Another month has come and gone, so now it's time to rank all 9 March 2025 movies that I saw from worst to best. And in last place is Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Road Trip. Let's make a sequel to a movie that came out 10 years ago that was both critically and commercially panned, and when we do the sequel, we'll write it without any actual source material, since the first movie was based on a book that does not have a sequel, and we'll replace the whole cast. We'll also make it super niche by having every joke be something only Mexicans would understand, because the audience of Mexicans who also like the first movie is so big. Now, you can do a movie with Mexican culture and have it do very well and be accessible to everybody. Movies like Coco and Flamin' Hot are great examples of that, but this one seems very narrow in the audience, which is weird, because you'd think Disney would want as broad an audience as possible, and doing a sequel to replace the original cast is such a terrible strategy. Greenlighting projects like this is why Disney is losing money in subscribers and why their stock is dropping. Not to mention, this movie is one of my least favorite genres, the road trip genre. Now, there are a couple I think worked, like Addams Family 2 and the Goofy Movie, but the majority of them, like Onward, Alvin and the Chipmunks, the Dare of a Kid the Long Haul, those are all pretty bad. There's only so many jokes you could do with that genre, and they've all been done. Leaving one of the family members at a gas station, for example. That's done in every road trip movie ever. Stop it. On top of that, the plot is all over the place. It's basically two different movies. On one hand, it's a road trip movie, and then it's also trying to be an Indiana Jones type story with this cursed idol, and I don't know, it was just odd. Maybe there's an audience for this, but it wasn't for me. For me, the jokes were the jokes I didn't get because I'm not Mexican, or they were jokes that have already been done in every other road trip movie. Number 8, Odessa. Now, this was a movie I was really looking forward to. The trailer had all the right vibes for me. Hey, a dystopian future with the aesthetic of an 80s film. That's also an 80s style rock opera. That sounds awesome. And unfortunately, the concept is a lot more interesting than the execution. There are some good ideas, but they're all very underdeveloped. It feels like it's borrowing from too many other stories. The rock opera album concept feels taken from Rush's 2112, which is a Rush album about a dystopian future, and Bob's Burgers even kind of had an homage to that in one episode. It also feels like a gender-swapped version of George Orwell's 1984, with the villain being this charismatic leader who has eyes everywhere. The aesthetic feels very derivative of the Capitol from the Hunger Games, and the concept of the main character being a farm worker who has a destiny to defeat the evil overlord, that's Star Wars A New Hope. Now, visually, it's very interesting, and at times it feels like an A24 film, and the songs are all really good. There aren't any bad songs in the movie, and the people involved can actually sing. It doesn't sound overly auto-tuned. However, the segues to the songs do not feel natural. They feel forced in. The main character is very paper-thin without much of an arc, making it hard to care what happens to her. If you ask me to describe the main character, I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you. Her love story is also very rushed. The film doesn't really take the time to flesh out their relationship. It just uses her falling in love as a way to make things go bad for her in the second act. The side character she falls in love with has much more of a character arc than she does. By the end of the film, it just feels very unsatisfying. The villain is the charismatic leader who is able to make the world into his own personal cult, and they don't give us much info about how the world got this way, or how he was able to take power and control people. It's mildly explained in like 1 or 2 sentences in the beginning, but again, there's a lot more potential that should have been further explored. This feels like a movie where they had this concept and outline, and then wrote songs based on the plot outline, but when it came time to turn it into a full-fledged story and script, they couldn't think of anything, so they just worked from the outline. Just listen to the soundtrack, because besides the visuals, that's the only thing interesting about this film. It may be inspired by Rush, but the film itself is also rushed. Number 7, The Woman in the Yard. This movie, unfortunately, is going to contribute to the stigma of PG-13 horror films aren't scary, which is not true. I've seen plenty of PG-13 horror films that have creeped me out quite effectively, and some had really well-done stories. Unfortunately, this movie has neither a good story or good scares. The film at times has some good psychological elements of having the main character and audience ask what's real and not real, and there is some creepy imagery. The film does work somewhat as a chamber piece, which is a movie where the main character is trapped in one location for most of the film. Films like Disturbia, 10 Cloverfield Lane, Quiet Place. But these are pieces that, when put together as a whole picture, don't really fit quite right. The film is riddled with horror movie cliches like the car not starting. The film comes off as very pretentious by trying to be a metaphor for grief and trauma, but the execution by the end comes off as very confusing, as if the filmmakers were trying to make the movie smarter than it could be. By the end, it all falls apart. This is just kind of a background noise movie for someone's Halloween party. It doesn't do anything new or interesting. It checks all the boxes and goes exactly where you'd expect. If you like predictable and safe horror films, this is one you'll probably enjoy, but if you're looking for something innovative, this is one you can skip. Number 6, Electric State. Well, it looks like outside of the MCU, the Russo brothers just cannot manage to make a good movie. The aesthetic of the world is interesting, and the world of the film could be more intriguing if the movie's world building wasn't so rushed. There's a lot of exposition in the first 15 minutes, and it's all told rather than shown. There could be some cool ideas here about an alternate 1990s where robots have risen up against the humans and we're at war, even though that premise has been done to death. But everything about the movie feels very safe. Though the film has huge stars such as Chris Pratt, Millie Bobby Brown, Giancarlo Esposito, and Ke Quan, they all feel very typecast. Pratt is basically Star-Lord again, Esposito is the same type of villain he plays in everything else, and even Ke Quan's character just feels like Data from the Goonies as an adult. The film also has a ton of forced MCU-style humor, and none of the jokes land. There's also a lot of forced product placement and 90s references. It's like the Pepsi product placement from Madam Web, the Olive Garden product placement from the first Sonic the Hedgehog movie, and all of the 90s references from Captain Marvel were taken as inspiration. I feel like this was a movie that had a lot of studio interference. I feel like the Russos wanted to make this dark, grungy, gritty sci-fi film that was a hard PG-13 or maybe even an R rating, but the Netflix executives who spent $320 million, the most expensive movie they've ever made, wanted to play it safe due to the high cost. As a result, the film feels incredibly generic, almost like it was found in a scrapyard and placed back together, even if the parts don't necessarily fit. The villains are generic and boring, the main characters are pretty thin and uninteresting, and the tone feels very all over the place. The film overall just feels formulaic. I feel like this is the type of movie that's going to get a much better director's cut with a more consistent tone and story that makes more sense, rather than this automaton of a film. If you like generic shut off your brain movies to have on as background noise, or to watch on a lazy weekend, you might find something to enjoy, but for me, this movie lacked a creative spark. Number 5, Plankton. Now, this was a movie I was very worried about, because the last 3 SpongeBob movies have all been pretty mixed to negative, especially because the previous SpongeBob movie focusing on Sandy was really, really bad. But despite the declining quality of SpongeBob over the years, Plankton is the one consistently funny element to it, which makes sense since Plankton's voice actor wrote quite a few episodes of the first 2 seasons. And yeah, a Plankton movie is actually really, really funny. The writing, jokes, and visual gags all feel in line with some of the best of SpongeBob's first 4 seasons, which, again, makes sense, since Plankton's voice actor was one of the co-writers on this movie. There were a ton of jokes that I thought were hilarious, which is more than I could say for the other SpongeBob movie sequels that, at their best, gave me a mild chuckle. There's a lot of throwbacks to classic SpongeBob episodes, such as Plankton's Army, Sweet Victory, and even the first SpongeBob movie. This is a musical, and the songs have a nice amount of time between them. There weren't any where I thought, really? We just had a song, can we move on? And the songs are all really, really catchy and great. There weren't any that I was waiting to be over. They're all really clever and funny. The musical numbers each have a distinct musical and animation style, which gives them a nice variety, and helps them stand out and not blend together. For example, one of Plankton's songs is animated in a rubber hose style, and has a musical tone that feels like it's from that era. Karen's song is, of course, techno, and I've had Karen's villain song stuck in my head since I watched this movie. Making Karen the main villain this time around is a nice, fresh idea. I realized with this movie that Karen and Plankton are all like Draken and Shigo from Kim Possible. Plankton and Draken are the slightly incompetent megalomaniacs, obsessed with destroying their archenemy, and Karen and Shigo are the real evil geniuses, who hate having to put up with them, especially after they always fail. And much like that one Kim Possible movie where Kim and Ron visit the future, where Shigo's gotten rid of Draken and taken over the world herself, Karen does manage to just say, fine, I'll just do it myself. There are a few story issues, mainly with previously established continuity. It's implied that Plankton's first time trying a Krabby Patty and becoming obsessed with getting the formula is not the crusted crab, where there's a whole episode showing that Mr. Krabs and Plankton created the patty together as kids. Karen knows Plankton's first name Sheldon after he creates her, even though there was an episode where she finds out his name is Sheldon and laughs at him. Then again, SpongeBob has never had much firm continuity, and these aren't major issues like the Sponge on the Run movie, where it says that SpongeBob and Sandy met as kids at summer camp, even though in the first episode of the show they met in an entirely different way. I can excuse this. There's also not really that much difference between this movie and a typical episode of the show. The first SpongeBob had a massive scale and story that could have only worked as a film. This one kind of feels like a long TV special. In something like the Rugrats movie or the Bob's Burgers movie, the plots feel cinematic where the stakes are much bigger than an episode of the show, which is a problem with a lot of movies based on shows. Unfortunately, they often feel just like big, longer episodes. Despite some very minor issues, the Plankton movie is great for adults who grew up with the heyday of SpongeBob and the kids who watch it now. It's a welcome return to the pineapple, or I guess chum bucket, under the sea. Number 4, Snow White. Another pleasant surprise this year. I was very skeptical and turned off by all the negative publicity and some of the odd decisions they made with this film, but I think at the end of the day, this is actually better than the original. For one, the characters are a lot richer and better written. In the original, what is Snow White like? Just this very happy person who doesn't have a lot of depth to her. In this version, she actually has a character arc. Even the Queen, who in my Disney animated films ranking I said was the best part of the film, still doesn't have a lot of depth to her in that version. She's just vain and wants to kill Snow White because she's vain. In this version, she's actually a lot more evil, as she rules her kingdom with an iron fist, and we see the people suffering under her reign. The relationship between Snow White and the prince is better written. In the original, they only have like 2 scenes, and their screen time together is 2 minutes at best. In this version, they have a better fleshed out relationship. And despite some comments the actress made about this version not focusing on her love story, they actually do have a love story, and it feels a lot more meaningful than the original. Rachel Zegler has a better singing voice than the original version. The original sounds screechy, and this voice is more melodious. Another issue the film fixes is there are a lot of new songs in this film, and the songwriters are the same as La La Land, The Greatest Showman, and Spirited, and all the new songs are great. Besides Hi Ho, what songs from the original film does anybody really remember? The Evil Queen gets a villain song, and it's one of the better Disney villain songs we've gotten in a while. Between this, the villain song in Mufasa, and the villain song in Moana 2, it feels like Disney villain songs are making a comeback. Though an issue with Gal Gadot's villain song is her choreography looks like a car dealership inflatable. Another issue is her villain song is reprised when she turns into the witch. And even though one of the lyrics explicitly states that one of the ingredients will change her voice, her singing voice still sounds the same, even after turning into the witch. In the original, Snow White is called Snow White because her skin is as fair as snow, but in this version, she's called Snow White because she's born during a blizzard. That's like giving birth to a boy in the car on the way to the hospital and naming him Carson. And speaking of Carson, as good as Zegler is, I feel Sophia Carson would have been a better choice. She played the Evil Queen's daughter in Descendants, so it would be a fun irony. That, and she looks a bit similar to Gal Gadot. Zegler is still pretty good at this, though. Now, a huge controversy before the film came out was a set photo that allegedly showed the dwarves as humans, and that was taken out of context. These characters are actually a gang of bandits. While the bandits as characters aren't that memorable, having Snow White's love interest be the leader, the bandits, swashbuckling bad boys, a bit of a Han and Leia dynamic, there was a pretty good choice. But it also seems like to take the bandits idea from Mirror Mirror, where the dwarves are bandits. But I think this is a movie that can appeal to both genders, whereas the original is made exclusively for girls. I think boys can get a lot out of the swashbuckling action, and Snow White as a character is a positive role model, though it does feel like they took a lot of what they did with Jasmine in live-action Aladdin and did that here. But they wrote the strong female character without it feeling forced. I liked how they did that. Of course, I gotta talk about the elephant in the room, the CGI dwarves. Oh my word, these things look awful. It's too reminiscent of the characters from Polar Express. Did they forget the scariest part of the movie? It's supposed to be the queen and not the dwarves. Another issue is the look of the film looks very similar to other live-action Disney fairy tale remakes. If I were to Photoshop the characters out of the screenshots from this movie and ask you if they were from Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, Maleficent, or Aladdin, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me. At least with Cruella, the film had a very different aesthetic and vibe than some of the other remakes. Honestly, I think if this were just a Snow White movie not released by Disney, people would be a lot less harsh on it. A lot of people hold the original a special place in their heart. So to see it remade almost seems blasphemous to them. But come on, folks. Disney wasn't the first to adapt Snow White. There have been countless other versions. This does enough that's new to justify it, without changing it so much that it's unrecognizable. Well, I wouldn't say it's a must-see. If you have kids who want to go see it, go on a Discount Tuesday. But if they don't care that much, then yeah, you can wait for Disney+. But I'm happy to say, this is the disaster people were making it out to be. Before I reveal my top 3, share your ranking. This list is just my opinion, and I'm aware there are some hot takes. Also, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. I'm so close to reaching 1,000. Number 3, The Life List. Now, honestly, if my future wife Sophia Carson wasn't in this movie, I probably would not have watched it. She was the only reason I had any interest in this movie, and I'm glad I watched it. It's a very sweet little story with good characters. It is weird hearing Sophia swear since she is a former Disney actress, and again, it's not actually her, it's a character, but it just feels jarring to me. This was a good drama that has some good plot twists. A movie like this can sometimes come off as forced or disingenuous, like the movie is trying to force you to feel something, but it all felt very natural. I like that this is a movie about a daughter getting closer with her late mother by fulfilling all the childhood dreams the daughter gave up on. I think the love story was a bit mixed, though. I'm not a fan of love triangles. I think they're stupid. I also think that maybe the story needed more time to develop the romance between the two leads. This is a very sweet, heartfelt movie about forgiveness, living the best life, love, and becoming a better person. Considering I'm not the target audience for this movie, since I'm not a girl between the ages of high school and 30s, I enjoyed it probably more than I should have. It's a nice little drama, and it's worth streaming. Number 2 is Looney Tunes The Day the Earth Blew Up. The animation of this movie shows why WB is one of the top animation studios. It's fluid and gorgeous. The visual gags and slapstick humor you expect from Looney Tunes are all here in this film. There are a few clever fourth wall breaks, one of which I think was the best part of the movie, and for the most part it feels like classic Looney Tunes. Key phrase here being, for the most part. There are, unfortunately, a couple of times in the first act where it feels like the humor is trying too hard to appeal to Gen Z by being trendy. It took me out of the film because it no longer feels like the world of Looney Tunes in those scenes. Fortunately, those types of jokes are only in the first act, and they go by pretty quickly. The film is a fun buddy comedy, teaming up Porky Pig and Daffy Duck, who work well off each other with dialogue and humor. The plot feels straight out of a cheesy 1950s sci-fi movie, mixed with an episode of Futurama, with references to classic sci-fi such as Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The film has relatively good pacing and a clever third act twist, as well as a payoff to a Chekhov's gun. This is one of the best animated films of the year so far. Go see it and support 2D animation. What holds it back is what I said, the trying to be trendy jokes. That's why it's number 2, but it's so close to being number 1. But my number 1 pick is Night of the Zoopocalypse. This is one of the most creative animated films I've seen in a while. The film is a collaboration between Canada, France, and Belgium, and the country of Belgium recently won an Academy Award for Best Animated Film for the movie Flow. The premise of the film is basically, what if H.P. Lovecraft was kid-friendly? The film is sort of a mix of The Penguins of Madagascar TV show, Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, and Five Nights at Freddy's. The way the zombie virus starts and is transmitted is wildly creative and different. I won't spoil how, but it's definitely done in a way I've never seen before, and definitely not something you'd ever expect. Much like Monsters vs. Aliens, this is a kid-friendly throwback to the B-movie horror films of the 50s. The film is also pretty sophisticated. There's no trendy pop culture references like the Looney Tunes movie, no misplaced pop songs like the Looney Tunes movie, no innuendo or profanity. This film is extremely pleasantly family-friendly, though some kids may of course be a bit scared by the infected zoo animals. They did their best to make them look cute, but some sensitive kids might be upset. This is a fantastic film that kids and adults will both enjoy. Take your family. So there you have it. There's my ranking. Let me know your ranking of the March releases that you saw, and I'll see you next time.